Testing. Yes, we are.
Podcast.
Yeah, you got me.
We're back.
Right.
So, those who have listened to the podcast for a long time, there aren't many. Those that have will remember that many, many years ago we used to have time to do extra podcasts. Oh, those heady days.
Heady days.
Yeah, on bizarre themes that came to mind as an excuse to review really old albums rather than really new albums. Anyway, because of what's going on at the moment, and because there's been quite a lot of things going on about 2020 and people looking back and posting pictures of themselves when they were 20 online and various social media kind of things, we kind of thought, hey, we can do something like that. How about we pick 3 albums each from the year when we were 20 and we review those. So,
excellent.
That's what we've done.
What a wonderful idea.
Indeed. So, we will be reviewing albums, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear. So, we're reviewing albums from the years of 1989 and the years of 1997. So, you'll be hearing reviews of the albums and discussions of the albums as follows. Todd Rundgren, Nearly Human. Faith No More, The Real Thing. Indigo Girls. Depeche Mode, Ultra. Pulp, This Is Hardcore. And the Prodigy, Fat of the Land. Because I'm the old person amongst the group, we shall be starting in the fine year of 1989. However, because I was trying to make this interesting, I avoided choosing Pixies Do Little, Tin Machine, or Pretty Hate Machine, which could quite easily have been my 3 choices. 3 mighty records, but a bit kind of, well, you know. I was about to say everyone likes them, but as we've had the discussion before, lots of people really don't like Tin Machine.
Yeah, we've had that discussion.
Indeed.
And
in fact,
had it been me, I would have definitely gone down the easy route of Pretty Hate Machine, as has been proven by my 3 choices.
You said that, Pete. I would not have said that, Pete. You said that.
Well, I'm just glad at the top. I'm just glad we did it this way round, and we didn't go with the other social media craze of trying to listen to 20 records, 10 each.
Well, yeah, indeed. Okay, we start off with Todd Rundgren, Nearly Human. Again, listeners probably won't be surprised. I've picked the Todd Rundgren album. I actually wasn't going to, and I was trying to find another album that I could choose instead of it, but, you know, this is definitely one that I know that I haven't made you listen to before, so I thought, fuck it, let's go for it. This is actually an interesting one to pick as well, because it was the last album that Todd made on a major record label. It was on Warner Brothers at the time. It was dropped after this album. Surprisingly, it was an album that got reviewed quite positively at the time, and actually produced Todd's last US hit single, which was the lead track "Want of a Nail," which features Bobby Womack on vocals as well. And I have to admit, I mean, obviously I've listened to this album multiple times over the years, but listening to it again, thinking back to how I felt about the album then and re-listening now, I genuinely still do think it's hard to believe this record wasn't more successful than it was, because it's, you know, for me, it's just a well-polished, well-crafted set of White Soul songs. The current version that we're reviewing today is based on the CD version as opposed to the original vinyl version, so therefore it also includes the cover of Elvis Costello's Two Little Hitlers, which wasn't on the original vinyl, which meant that the first time I listened to this again the other day, it freaked me out totally because it fucked up the running order. And it was like, what? Where's this song coming from? This song isn't here on this album. What's Alexa doing? It's not that it's a bad song, don't get me wrong. I think it's a very good cover. But when you, as you'll know yourself, and there are several albums. I think the problem with reviewing any album these days, when you go back to older albums, is quite often you end up with the CD version, which, if you originally bought album versions, suddenly becomes different and has extra songs on that weren't there and various bits, which we'll come to later. Anyway, for me, this album was possibly Todd at his most commercial, I would say. That's not just because he was on Warner Brothers at the time, but I think that's just the way he was going with the sound he was looking for. Had a band made up of ex-members of the Tubes and Bourgeois Tag, both bands that he had produced coming into this record. I just genuinely think it's just a lovely, lovely white soul record. As I said at the start, the first half of the album, so tracks 1 to 5, so 1 to Play on to Can't Stop Running, is the slightly more, I suppose, pop rocky side of things. Well, to ask me, probably Unloved Children, but the second half, when you've got Fidelity, Feel It, which is originally a song he wrote with the Tubes for the Tubes, which appeared on their Love Bomb album, Hawking and I Love My Life, are very much straight in the white soul category of the kind of thing that you'd expect Hall & Oates to do and bands like that. Feel It itself, as I've spoken about that, I think is one of the best songs on the record. It was a lovely song when he wrote it with the Tubes. I think it's even better on this. It's just a really, really, really moving, uplifting tune from a purely kind of pop-tastic point of view. You can see why The Wonderful Neon was a hit. And it's not just because Bobby Womack's singing on it, although it does help that Bobby Womack's singing on it. But it's just, we all know the kind of thing of For the Want of a Nail. And the favourite track on the album, when I first bought the record, was Waiting Game. Still the Waiting Game. Still think this is just a beautiful, beautiful ballad. It's just it's a solid album, but a solid album in a really good way. Solid album. And it's still
positive.
And it still annoys me that it's when you kind of go through the tracks. For me, you get through the tracks and you're thinking, I can imagine most of the songs in this album being hits if they'd been recorded by other people at the time. And that's the kind of thing that I always found frustrating about quite a few of Todd albums, but this one in particular, because this was genuinely possibly the most commercial he's ever been across a full album. And whether it was the record company not getting behind it enough or other things, I don't know. But there are lots of potential hits on this record that never got the chance to be hits, in my humble opinion.
Okay. Well, it's another Todd album you've made me listen to.
But they're all different.
They are all different, and you know what? This album, even within itself, is all different. I have to say, I think you're probably wearing me down gradually, because the more I listen to Todd Rundgren albums, the more I really start to appreciate his crisscrossing of genres every opportunity. And whilst most of this album is a great white soul album, and some of the more commercially sounding tracks are classic sort of transatlantic 1980s hits. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The sort of the Want of a Nail and Can't Stop Running being prime examples of that sort of commercial sound. But then in other tracks, there's also a reflection of perhaps some of the more of the new wave that was happening across this side of the pond a few years before. Two Little Hitlers and I really liked the intro to Unloved Children, which obviously had that sort of almost a hint of disco about it.
Yeah.
It had that sort of the bass from like Boogie Nights, dun 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 dun. underneath it, you know. Boogie Nights.
Great song.
So it's the usual madness is what I've written at the top of my notes. but I mean that in a good way. No, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed this one. I perhaps enjoyed it more than some of his more recent ones. No, actually, I've enjoyed the recent ones. It's the ones in between that I haven't quite managed yet.
There's still time.
There's still time, I'm sure.
Yeah, when we do 40-40.
Exactly.
Moving on to my second choice, and obviously moving up a couple of notches on the. This one goes up to 11, kind of decibel level. We have Faith No More, The Real Thing. This is the third album from Faith No More, and for me, it still remains the career-defining album from Faith No More. This was their first album with Mike Patton on vocals following the departure of Chuck Mosley, who had sang on their first two albums. The first two albums, they were still very much, for me at least, Chili Peppers light. And whilst on this album you have particularly the song like Epic, which still has that Chili Peppers vibe, particularly in the vocal and delivery style, this was also Epic particularly was kind of a revisit of the song We Care a Lot that Chuck Mosley had sang on the second Faith No More album. But what I liked about this album was this was them taking the record heavier, but at the same time, it was a record that also had that feeling of, you know what, let's just throw the kitchen sink into this and make rock interesting again. You know, so this is almost one of the first, I suppose, of the new wave of alt metal kind of thing. If you like, that kind of thing of thinking, what do we do? We've had people do this, and this, but how do we make something people stand up and listen? How we did that is by having From Out of Nowhere as the opening track on the album, as far as I was concerned. This became a go-to indie disco headbanger, literally, for Spencer and I, a friend of podcast. Because we had a DJ friend who used to do a night on a Thursday night at, and anytime he played this, we would be up. You know, just the power and the passion of the opening bars of this song still made me wish I had hair to be able to do old-fashioned headbanging along to it. It's just, you know, literally every time this song starts, I'm going, yes, I'm back to being my 20-year-old self. Literally every time. But what I also like about the album is it embraces funk rock rap on songs like Epic, Falling to Pieces, even Zombie Eaters to a certain extent. The title track is a kind of rock epic. You've got some classical guitar on Zombie Eaters. You've got outright metal on From Out of Nowhere, and particularly Surprise You're Dead, which has always been a favourite of mine and one that I've often threatened to have played at my funeral. Simply because, why wouldn't you? It'd be funny. And the sound-wise of the album, it's the centre of the record is the bass playing. So this fuzzy, distorted bass sits front and centre of the whole sound of the album, which means when played very loud, sorry neighbours, this album still rocks, really rocks. Back to what I said on the previous record, the War Pigs cover and Edge of the World, which are now on the list of what was on the original CD and sometimes appear on the original CD, were not on the original vinyl version. The album ended with Woodpecker from Mars instrumental. However, I do like that cover of Sabbath's War Pigs. And they're a band that, from this point on, went on to record some good albums and some very, very great tracks. But for me, this was the one time when it all came together and they made their one fully coherent album. And yeah, listen to it again today, this afternoon. I was thinking, you know what? This is a bloody good record.
Yeah, I agree. And that point you made about coherence, it surprised me how much I like this now. And having heard, going back years, having listened to it probably years ago as an album, but actually then sort of hearing the odd track now and then, as you say, in the indie disco somewhere. Epic is still epic, in my opinion. But there are other tracks like The Morning After, which is, it's still rocks, still good rocks for me.
Yeah.
And The Real Thing. Surprise You're Dead. I enjoyed this time. It was very good. For me, it's that freshness. It's that coherence. It actually sounds, for an album that's, sorry, Scott, over 30 years old.
Indeed.
It sounds very fresh. It still sounds very current, and probably more so now. And again, perhaps this is testament to the impact it's had over the decades. That sort of freshness has endured because, again, sort of the influences ripple out from it.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it. Really think it's a really tight album as well. They did go on to do other stuff, of course they did, but that sort of freshness it's complete here.
You are correct.
Of course I am.
And my final choice, just to go off on another bizarre musical sideline, is to go kind of folky pop. And the second album from the Indigo Girls, all the Indigo Girls. This one is, again, interesting for me because I discovered this band and this album on the 3rd of November 1989, when myself, Spencer, Jason, Joe, and I think Lucy as well, whilst we were at university in Swansea, went off to the Newport Centre to see the 10,000 Maniacs in concert, who at the time were touring their Blind Man Zoo album. And the Indigo Girls, Emmy Ray and Emily Salier, were support act. And we were all blown away by them as a support act. Spence, Joe and I immediately went out and bought the album pretty much. And really listening to this album this week reminded me just why, really. From the infectious kind of foot-tapping acoustic riff of Close to Fine at the start to the gentle reminiscence of a relationship at the history of us at the end of the record. This is just a really, really lovely record. For me, the first half is pretty faultless, second half not far off it. The strength of the record for me is the combination of well-crafted songs, which always helps on any record, and the vocal harmonies. I've always, from the first time I saw them live to even listen to it again now, the blend of Ray and Sally's vocals, I think, is marvellous. And the sound of the album is great as well. It was produced by Scott Litt, who they'd got involved with because they'd known that he'd produced the R.E.M. album and they'd toured with R.E.M., who also appear on the album. In fact, Michael Stipe adds his vocal talents to the song Kid Fears.
Yeah.
No track on the album. Amusingly, the album also features the Hot House Flowers, who had just finished recording their debut album People at the time, and then ended up also providing musicianship on this record. And also from a Ping point of view, Kazim Sultan, Todd's go-to bass man, also experience on the song "Land of Canaan," which in fact I'd totally forgotten about until I was catching up on this again. It's just when I saw this track listing again, when I pulled it out a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking, oh yeah. And I remembered I could like hum most of the first half of the album, and the second half of the album I was thinking, I can hum a bit of Love's Recovery, maybe a bit of Land of Canaan. Couldn't remember Centre Stage or History of Us at all, and I was thinking, maybe that's because they're crap. And then I listened to it again, and I was thinking, actually no, they're far from it. In fact, History of Us, I think, at the end of the album is just really, really beautiful song. But the album is split between toe tapper stuff, so Close to Fine and Love's Recovery, Probably True, particularly. Ooh, I've got some feedback.
Oh.
It's interesting because the feedback is not meant to be feedbacking.
All right.
However, Prince of Darkness. I love this. There's a line in Prince of Darkness. I did write this one down somewhere. It goes, I don't know when I noticed life was life at my expense. The words of my heart lined up like prisoners on a fence. The dreams came in like needy children tugging at my sleeve. I said, I have no way of feeding you, so leave. Which I just think is just kind of sums up the kind of whole feel of the song. And the lyrics, I mean, obviously we're a big fan of lyrics between us generally. And in fact, our last podcast featured several albums with very good lyrics. But I think it's another strength of this record. I think the lyrics are really, really interesting, really, really good. Kid Fears, the one I said that Michael Stipe appears on, for example, is that kind of song about growing up and being in a place where people know where your hiding places and secrets are, and kind of wanting to go back to that kind of childhood innocence of fears that actually aren't really fears about stuff. And yes, that's it. I could waffle on, but I want to get onto your records as well. So, this album stands up remarkably well for me. I was worried when I first listened to it, thinking, am I still going to think this is a really good record? And the answer is, yes, I do. They've gone on to release more albums, of course. And in fact, coincidentally, their latest album is actually due out next week. So,
excellent.
There you go.
In the interest of time, I'll just agree with what you said. I thought it was a really interesting songwriting piece. It's a lovely sounding record. It again, still very, very timeless. I can see why it appeals to you when we consider some of the albums we've reviewed together. Why this one has sort of stuck with you, I can really appreciate that, and it's definitely worth checking out. And I really enjoyed it as well.
Okay, let's fast forward
in the interest
to
of time,
1997.
moving forward in time to a time known as 1997. Fortuitously,
Where are you going to start?
Well, I'm going to start at the beginning because as we did this based on year 20, this album was actually released on my birthday of that year, and it is Depeche Mode's Ultra, which for those of you that don't know, this was their follow-up to the massively successful Songs of Faith and Devotion. But this was the first album they released for many years as a three-piece. Alan Wilder, the influential musician, some would say he brought as much to the music as Martin Gore did to the lyrics at their peak. He had left the band. and famously, of course, between the recording, or as the recording of this album began, but certainly between the release of this album and the previous album, Dave Gahan, the lead singer, had famously had his journey to hell and back, and the sort of tentative steps of recovery from a very serious case of heroin addiction and near fatal death had sort of resulted in this sort of washed up version of Depeche Mode. I think it was an impossible ask for them to come back with something that was even reminiscent of their previous work. And yet, on reflection, they kind of got it together, I think, with this album. It's not the easiest of their albums to listen to. It's the fact that they've lost such a talent in Wilder, that the fact that they're still finding, in fact, they haven't found their place as a three-piece yet. I think that comes on the next album. It's really acute that there is that absence, and again, there's that distance between the recording of the album as well. You can hear Dave's, mottled, fucked up vocal and earlier recordings. You can hear how his voice recovers on some of the later recordings on the album. And but I think it does sort of find its way back to the soul or the core of where Depeche Mode were heading after the previous album, that sort of gospel-infused songs of faith. The sort of soulfulness of this album comes through. They relied heavily, of course, on Tim Shimian, producer, Bob the bass. He sort of came in and sort of gave them, I guess, that fourth leg, and his influence across the production of the album is very apparent as well. The sort of very dirty sort of beats of the album, particularly on some of the album tracks, those that weren't released as singles. But again, the singles, like Barrel of a Gun, being the sort of broken sounding, dark, lyrically introduction to the album. But some of the later tracks, like Useless and some of the less known stuff like Free State and Love Thieves, introduce a very sort of different side to the band and start to take those tentative steps back to the light, if you will, for the band. So why did I pick this? Well, I picked it because it was on my birthday, obviously. And as you know, big Depeche Mode fan. It's not my favourite album of theirs by any means, but actually I do think in time it has aged fairly well. A lot of the sort of sounds they were putting down, whilst it jarred for me at the time, considering the heights to which Songs of Faith and prior to that Violator got to, I think this album jarred for me at the time because it really did feel like the excess suggested by the title, the crashing down, had occurred, and it was very hard to see where they would come back from. But come back they did in time, and I think the sort of first steps towards that comeback are sort of laid down here musically. Indeed, the three-piece that would emerge, listening back to it now, you can hear it here.
Yeah. I can see where you're going there.
Good, I'm glad.
Yeah.
Oh, and Home's nice as well. I like Home.
Well, yeah, this is... I'm still getting feedback. Where did the feedback come from? Where did the feedback come through on the recording? You're really annoying for people.
Carry on.
This isn't really a favourite DM album for me, although I did buy it. In fact, oddly, of the three albums you've chosen, this is the only one I actually bought, as opposed to taping the CD taping onto tape via CD from the library I was working at the time, which is what I did with This Is Hard and Prodigy. So I actually did buy Ultra. And I think, as you're saying, one of the most interesting things about this album is putting it in the context of how it came about, which gives it that extra kind of interest, I suppose, in a way. Whilst it's not one of my favourite DM albums, it does contain a couple of my favourite DM songs. So you mentioned Barrel of a Gun. I think Barrel of a Gun is another in those handful of classic DM hard rock songs that are not hard rock songs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Songs that aren't that rock but have a very hard rock attitude to them. And has a great riff. Similarly, Useless as well. Always loved the guitar riff and Useless, the start of it, just brilliant. Also has possibly my favourite Martin singing one of his own songs, as you mentioned, Home. Because we always have that. I mean, we've had this discussion before as well. You always have that really the great irony of a man that, particularly at this time as well, was still writing all the songs for the band, and then he would sing one song on the album, and people would go, "Yeah, that song's a bit shit." Yeah, he wrote them all though. It's like, yeah, I know, but why is he singing the shit one? It's like, whereas Home is, for me, one of the standout tracks on this record. Still now, and it's no good. It was a single as well. You know, it's a cracking tune. Great live.
I forgot to mention it. I always thought that was it has something a bit Bondian underneath it if you listen carefully.
Well, I think Love Thieves is like that. Love Thieves always reminds me of Bond.
So I think it's not, if you're a casual fan, it's not the greatest of their albums. If you're a fan of the band, you know the history, you know the context, then I think it does sound really good. It has worn well. So yeah, that's my first pick from what turned out to be a good year for me picking music that is depressing.
Yes, I'm just about the 97 view. It was strictly speaking, it's 97 to 98.
It is, yes. So this is
because we decided. Actually, I didn't make this clear at the start. Actually, I should have done. When I was saying in 2020, we decided to go for the year of our birthday. Yeah. For me, since I'm born literally on the final day of the year, it meant the entire following year, January to December the 31st. For you, it meant from April 15th of 97 to April 14th of 98.
So, whizzing through that year, we get to the summer, and my summer that year was not about Be Here Now by Oasis, which was rubbish. It was about The Fat of the Land by The Prodigy. This was another album that was a long time coming. When you consider that Firestarter, perhaps the most notable famous track off the album, one of their biggest hits, one of the best known of their songs of all time, was released in November 96, I think. And you sort of scale through to the Fat of the Land making its appearance in, I think it was July of that year. I've clearly done my research. And it was such actually, no, it was March of 96 was Firestarter. It was Breathe, the second song, which was November. And again, so a huge gap between that being released and the album in June of 97. And again, this was an album that felt like it'd been gestating for a long time, but when it finally arrived, it just pulled all the pieces together. The sort of promise of that sort of melting pot of electronica, techno, industrial rock that had been sort of alluded to by Music for the Jilted Generation several years before, it all sort of landed. I think it landed in a complete package. I think this still is their standout album. And
Yes.
and it was that sort of, this was the phase of their career when they were having all the hits. Well, on those, they were sparingly coming, and big gaps in between, as we've just said. But this is when the hits did land, and you had Firestarter, you had Breathe, you had. I mean, it was controversial then. It would probably never get played now. Smack My Bitch Up, which opens the album and was released as a single with I don't even remember, the excellent video, which sort of turned the title on its head. Kids, look it up on YouTube. And the album, even the filler in between, there's no filler. You have tracks like Minefields and Narayan featuring Crispin Mills, who obviously was riding high at the time with his own band. And the way that just sort of bleeds into Firestarter, and then out of that you have Climatize. The album just builds up superbly to that Firestarter. It takes Firestarter, which has obviously been around and in the public for a long time, and it sort of reinvented it and sort of put it at the cornerstone of this album. But it actually takes you on a journey before you get there. You go through Diesel Power, you go through Funky Shit, which is sort of more of the EDM, more of the sort of what the Prodigy was perhaps known for before you get to the rock and the punk of the other parts of the album. I thought, for me at the time, this was my summer of '97. This was a culmination, I think, of several genres that I was heavily into and influenced by at the time. It's complete. It's a complete album for me at that time. Now, looking back on it, do I still enjoy it as much? I still think it's their best album.
It is still a best album. I agree.
I think this was a very.
I've made jokes about that on their on their subsequent albums.
It's been a lot. It's been a very difficult. It's been a very difficult journey as a fan since. The next album proper didn't come for several years, and when it did, it was disappointing. I think it's only in the really recent, the last 5 to 10 years. Gosh, we're going back 10 years now, aren't we? To Invaders Must Die. It sort of took a long time to sort of come back from that, and I guess it's all the more poignant now, of course, with the passing of Keith Flint last year, to actually go back and listen to this at his peak as the vocalist, and thinking about him as well, and thinking about them as a band, and particularly the talent of Liam Howlett. And I don't know what will happen now with the Prodigy, but I do hope that they are able to come back in some shape or form. But unfortunately, I don't think it'll ever surpass this album, which was fantastic, a classic of the 90s.
Indeed, I think this was one of those kind of zeitgeist albums, really, wasn't it? A kind of gateway music drug to bring the rock and metal audience into the dance scene. I always thought at the time. We'd already had the bridge from rock to rap established by the likes of Run DMC, Public Enemy, Beastie Boys, who, of course, coincidentally, 2 members of Beastie Boys co-wrote Funky Shit with Liam Howlett on this album. And so particularly for that whole kind of metal, attracting metal heads vibe, Breathe, Firestarter, Serial Thriller definitely all fell into that kind of box of going, look, you can do rock and make it a bit dancey too, and it's not a total sellout. It's still quite fun, It's all right. And I like all those songs because they're all great. But for me, I always had softer spots for other tracks on the album. So always had a soft spot for Minefield, as you mentioned earlier on, which I always really, really liked. Narayan. Again, surprisingly, always liked. Although I think I always liked that, possibly more because it sounded a bit more like
Yeah.
Orbital. You have that kind of Mike Oldfield influence that Orbital took on, kind of synth riff going on in it. And also, I think Climatize also has that kind of same Orbital thing going on as well. But with Nyan, it's quite interesting because if you think about, as you said, this was done with Crispy and Cooler Shaker Mills at the time. Obviously now it would be Noel Gallagher or Ed Sheeran providing that particular
it would.
role on this track, which is quite funny to think about. Obviously Noel Gallagher, it would sound no different. Ed Sheeran perhaps would sound slightly different, but Noel, it would just Noel's basically made that record a couple of times since.
Exactly.
In the last couple of years. Yeah. I still find it quite interesting that they still have the cover of L7's Fuel for Fire at the end of the album, which always perplexed me at the time, because I was never sure it added anything to the original. I still don't think it does.
I don't get it even to this day. I didn't get it then. I don't get it now. I'd always finish Acclimatise. I mean, I could take it or leave the end, which seems odd, really, when you think it's a great album, it's a classic album, blah 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 blah, and then it's just like it's got this tacked-on song at the end.
Yeah, and that's what always felt like that. But I always felt like, okay, we've only got 9 tracks.
We've got it.
Do we have anything else?
We've got to finish the album, man.
Oh, the good old days when people had to tack on a 10th track to kind of pad out their album, rather than now when they just go, no, put it all on the record, all of it, all of it, They want to hear all of it. No, we won't. No, we won't. And also, as I've alluded to, they are a band who have, since this record, as you said, which is definitely their high point, musical high point, been trying to remake this album again every few years for the last couple of decades. Invaders Must Die was their best attempt at trying to remake it. The last album, which I've forgotten the title of already, that we reviewed a couple of years ago, was their last pained attempt at doing it, because it was you're just thinking, no,
it was
a new drum machine,
no drum machine. That was it.
Yeah. Well, that's very apt for today, really, isn't it? They could release that now.
Yeah,
because it's definitely no tourist at the moment.
Lockdown classic. So that was my summer. And it was 97. I think often in my mind it was a golden year. It was a good year. But as with all great periods in one's life, all the parties must come to an end, and everything does come crashing down. And that period of musical history, the sort of the peak of Britpop, certainly can't be, the come down from that era cannot be better symbolized, I think, than by This Is Hardcore by Pulp, which really was the come down album for the 90s for me, having had a run of great years of music, of British music, of different types, genres, rock, pop, industrial, whatever. For me, this was in March of 1998. This very much brought a change of tone and sort of hinted at a sort of a more of a pre-millennial tension. I think that was a phrase from the time to come. And very much was different to what had gone before, with that great commercial success of Different Class in.
Very brave album musically, considering that was the album that had, literally made them multi-platinum out.
One of the albums of all time, and they followed it up with a very much an end of the party sort of come down record. But do you know what? Again, whilst it's clearly not the greatest album, it's one that stuck with me. And when I think about the sort of gentleness of, and again, that sort of classic Jarvis Cocker sort of feel of tracks like Dishes and Help the Aged. In particular, Help the Aged, of course, which is, I think, was the lead single.
You say the hit single, the
which led the album. But again, there's some great rock in here as well. I mean, you've got Party Hard.
Yes,
and,
love Party Hard. Hello, Bowie.
Exactly.
Hello, Bowie. Bowie
and Glory Days as well, which is a sort of great end of the night sort of album record as well. And I just think again, it sort of took what they'd done with Different Class, and actually just took a sort of grabbed the audience and said, right, now we have your attention. We're going to give you something that's perhaps more reflective of what we've been crafting for the last 20 years.
Well, only John Peel was listening
and
to
here's
us.
some of the influences, and here's some of the things that have shaped us. And I think they did it successfully. As far as I recall, this album was, not as successful, but was very successful at the time. It was, a well-liked album. And it's certainly, I know I have it buried away somewhere. I had to dig out the Spotify version of this, which has about 20 other tracks added to it, with all the B-sides and remixes and stuff.
Yeah, it's better than saying earlier on. It's hard these days to actually find that to find, particularly if you've bought anything on vinyl.
But this
very hard. But even CD stuff, kind of going, oh, this is the version that they remastered 2 years ago that now has 75 extra tracks on it. Thinking, what? No, what was the actual album? No, stop, enough.
And I think again, it was just that sort of reflective, introspective reflection of sort of the price, the height and the price of fame. And it did feel like when this album came, it did feel that a little corner of British music history had just closed, and that this was Jarvis sort of saying, "Well, you've had a good." You can imagine him saying it in Sheffield accent. I'm not going to do the accent. You've had a good time, but now it's time for you to go home.
Yes, I agree. It's. I remember at the time, my brother really, really loved this record. In fact, probably still loves this record. He certainly at the time thought it was their best work. My brother had liked them, was aware of them before they became popular, but then obviously got really into them. And this album, he just thought was sublime. I was always a fan of side one of the album. Back in the day, was less enamored with the side two at the time. So it was interesting listening to it again now, having not listened to the certainly listened to bits of the album since, but I hadn't listened to the whole album as an album, certainly for it's probably over 10 years since I last listened to it, and that was probably at my brother's.
Yeah.
What I love about the album, I still think the start of it is brilliant. You mentioned Dishes, quite funny song, short song. Actually, I think this is possibly the shortest song on the album, actually, because it is quite a long record. So it is that classic band thing of going, now we've roped you in, we're going to do lots of long songs.
Yes.
To prove we can be really interesting and kind of write songs that go on for 6 and 7 minutes.
Yeah, and This Is Hardcore, the title track was a long one.
Yeah. But one of my favorite songs by the band ever.
One of my favorite of theirs. You could argue that the final track, The Day After the Revolution, was a bit self-indulgent.
Well, yeah. If you do the full version that has lots of dead sound and various other things going on, yes, yeah. I like when you look up on Wikipedia when he goes, yes, the edited version of 5 minutes. So bonus track. They go, yeah. When they actually just played you the song rather than the song with the lots of dead air before the song restarts again later on. Yeah. It's like, oh look what we can do with this new technology. It's fun, isn't it? No, it's not really. Seriously, stop it now. I thought at the time it was a brave album. I still think it was, even looking back, I think it's still, when you compare it to the previous album. The previous album, was it called Common People? The previous album, or
Different Class.
Different Class. Sorry, yes, I can say. Yeah. I can see the cover in my head. Different Class, which was. And I'm going to mention Todd Rundgren again, but it is that kind of thing of bands that have a big success with something and then rail against it by kind of refusing to just churn out the same thing again. Because obviously the thing is, record companies and various other been going, well, we just released this album, people love this sound, ka-ching, just do the same thing again until it's not ka-ching and then change. Whereas lots of bands and artists, well, I say lots, actually very few, but some bands and artists are going to go, you know what, no, I just, now we've got people hooked in, let's show them what we can do. Which is always a brave stroke stupid thing to do, depending on your point of view.
I think they were very brave. I think they pulled it off.
So do I. They said this album sold really well. However, subsequent albums didn't. So maybe, maybe had they done different, different Class 2 for this, raked in some more cash, then done this album, then But then again, as we discussed, they spent 20 years almost to be an overnight success. So fuck it, frankly.
Fair play.
Yeah, like we've done it now. We've got. I think there's a thing. We've got people's attention. Let's play. Let's show people what we can do. They either like it or they don't. We know what it's like to be a band where only a few people listen to you for several years. So, so be it. That's be admired, really. And Jarvis is still going, obviously.
Obviously. You won't stop him.
No. In fact, he now has a silly new name, doesn't he?
Is he?
Yeah, the recording, isn't it? Isn't it kind of like... How is it? It is like Jarvis. Or something.
Oh, okay.
But it is... He started recording again, and it is rather daft. But...
Okay.
It's on Six Music, clearly.
Oh, clearly, yes.
Where all the cool people are.
Yeah.
Right, so that's enough waffling on. If you're still listening and thinking, Christ, that was longer than normal. Yeah, well,
That was us. That was our own self-indulgence.
Yeah, and also, we only keep to the half an hour thing when we're in the same room together. We can actually,
I think we're doing okay.
Monitor each other and shut the other person the fuck up. It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
Until next time, which will be another normal. I say normal.
Normal. It's never normal.
Another normal-ish podcast when we review 6 new albums, that kind of thing. Anyway, until then.